Platform fighters largely originated with the Super Smash Bros. Series, but over the last few years, they've really come into their own as a genre, so today I'm going to go over 10 of the best designed, coolest platform fighter characters I've ever come across. I'm putting a strict limit of 2 characters per game on here. It was really tempting for me to mention a lot more and really hard to narrow this down, but when you put out a tweet asking for suggestions and you get like the entire Rivals of Aether roster, and for basically all of them you say, yeah, I could see that, you know you need to streamline things a little bit. It's also worth pointing out that, look, I've played a lot of platform fighters, and clearly I've played some of them more than others. Some of them I'm more personally fond of than others. Some of their mechanics I think just fundamentally lend themselves better to being in a video like this. I know that some of these videos do make their way back to platform fighter game devs, so if you don't see your game on here, don't take it personally. This really is not an attempt to be an unbiased list. It's very much coming from my perspective. Other than that, let's just get into it. Starting off with a true classic here, I'm going with Kirby from Super Smash Bros. Brawl. I maintain that to this day, Kirby is still by far the most important platform fighter character ever created. He's the best beginner-friendly character by a mile. His moveset does a fantastic job teaching new players the mechanics of how attacks in the Super Smash Bros. Series are going to work. His recovery is very forgiving because of the multiple jumps, which also makes him a lot of fun in casual settings. His Inhale is still, I think, the single most brilliant platform fighter move ever created. It gives players a sampling of the entire roster while still being really fun to use standalone as well. His Inhale standalone use along with moves like Danner teach players about the concept of edge guarding in a very natural way, a way that's relatively forgiving too. I certainly don't think he's perfect. I do think there would be ways to incorporate more of his canon moveset into his kit in a way that would still allow for that naturalistic, beginner-friendly expression, but I think what we have here is still so fundamentally good and important and well implemented, and no other platform fighter has come along which even kind of replicates what Kirby is able to do. I've gone with the Brawl variant specifically because the Smash 64 version has some pretty infamous tuning issues, and then the Melee version does in the opposite direction, and then compared to the more modern Smash titles, Brawl emphasizes the more unique aspects of the character and the more iconic aspects. This is by far the closest the hammer has ever been to being a great move, and is by far one of the best copy abilities in the Kirby series too. He gets to use the final cutter as an actual proper projectile, which again is how it operates in the Kirby series, and it gives him a little bit more depth and neutral. Yeah, if you follow the Smash series, you've probably heard a lot of these points brought up before, but it would be just insane not to include Kirby somewhere on this list. Okay, taking a very different approach for our next entry here. Gizmo from Multiversus. There are a lot of individual little elements on Gizmo's kit that are interesting. Oh, his neutral attack is actually an arrow. That's cool. Oh, and you can charge it up so it's on fire. Nice. Oh, he throws popcorn in the air with his up attack. That's interesting. Oh, whoa, he spits out music notes, and if too many of them stack on your opponent, you get a silencing effect. You actually turn off their specials for a short amount of time. That's cool. I haven't seen much like that before. So that's all neat, but what really starts putting Gizmo together for me is when you start realizing all of the ways his individual aspects synergize with each other. That flaming arrow is cool in its own right, but you can also fire it through the popcorn to create a flaming shotgun blast. That popcorn can also be infused with music notes, and you can send it along on different trajectories, and then you can shoot that infused popcorn with a flaming arrow. And while there's plenty of cool ways for Gizmo to interact with the popcorn, his opponent also gets to interact with it, so you get these really cool, intricate zoning scenarios. That's not to say by any means that Gizmo is a pure zoner though. He has stubby normals as you'd expect and stubby aerials, but they're really satisfying to hit, and they make his kit feel very complete, especially again when you start really combining the different aspects of it together, using the arrow to combo into his killing up air, for example. Even his car, which at first seems like a very functional move certainly, but more just a random chucked in reference to Gremlins, which by the way, as with most Multiversus characters, the references on this character are spot on. Even the car has interesting ways to interact with the rest of his moveset, so Gizmo seems like sort of a haphazard slapdash collection of moves, but they blend and weave together just fantastically. I love the fundamental design of this character, but Multiversus is notable for an increased focus on doubles compared to most platform fighters, and Gizmo is classified as a support character. This means that his teammate can also interact with a lot of these elements, and he's got some specific team synergy abilities, like being able to latch onto his teammate's back and be carried around like he's in a backpack, which again, clear reference to Gremlins. One of the major issues I have with Multiversus is that while assigning some characters to more singles focus and some characters to more double focus is natural enough to do, it still means that often characters sort of feel lacking in one game mode versus the other. That's not to say the Multiversus team doesn't put any effort towards making all characters viable and somewhat interesting, at least in all game modes. They do, but there's definitely some clear focus splitting there. His kill power can be a little bit lacking in singles sometimes, and he's not nearly as intricate as some doubles focused designs, but I think he works extremely well in both modes and is a ton of fun to play. Moving on to something a little bit older here. Burn from Rivals of Aether. Platform fighters don't lend themselves especially well to stealth-based characters. The action is very fast-paced and all the information on the screen is symmetrical. For Burn, they took a two-pronged approach here. They let him spawn smoke that he can hide in only when he's not throwing out an attack, and they let him spawn a clone of himself, which acts relatively realistically for the first second or two, and he gets to decide which side the clone will spawn on, left or right. So these two elements put together actually allow for a really fun, expressive, and surprisingly balanced stealth game, where the opponent will always have plenty of ways to interact with the stealth elements, but they still don't feel underpowered on Burn's end either. They actually are a really key aspect of how he plays. Rivals of Aether characters tend to be very intricate and based around some kind of stage controller transformation aspect, an animal, and one of the 4 classical elements, and I think smoke just plays so perfectly into the moveset here, and huge credit to Dan Fornici and his team. This did not happen overnight. I've been following Rivals of Aether since early access, and Burn, especially the clone, has gone through a lot of tweaks over the years, but what we've ended up with is worth what I'm sure must have been a lot of headaches. And if you think I'm just here to praise the smoke aspect, you're wrong, even though he also does have the ability to completely sacrifice that aspect of his design if he really wants to say, oh nah, it's on now. Because by inhaling the smoke several times, he gets the ability to do a huge combustion attack at the cost of being able to spawn any additional smoke until he's either decided to use the combustion or sacrifice it to get more smoke back. Yeah, Rivals of Aether character designs are complicated. I also need to give a lot of praise to his hand-to-hand combat. He uses this really interesting combination of a dagger, his cape, his limbs, and it creates this really smooth, expressive, flowing combo game, which, like most Rivals of Aether characters, is centered around a few main staple kill moves. Dan Fornici has prior experience working on traditional fighting games, so the concept of linkers and finishers made their way into Rivals of Aether, and in Burn's case, I think they feel very natural and well implemented. You've got a very simple one with down smash, or down strong as Rivals of Aether calls them, and then you have moves like back air and down air with sweet spots that take a bit more finesse. And these both feel precise and situational enough to reward skill, but not so finicky that they become frustrating. His kit does a great job linking into these moves in fun ways. Up next here, I'm going to give you a 2-for-1. You'll see why in a second. These are the ultimate reps, Wolf and Pokemon Trainer. If Kirby's the best jack-of-all-trades character from a beginner-friendly perspective, I think Wolf so far is the pinnacle of this archetype that we've ever seen in a platform fighter. He feels just absolutely phenomenal to move around with, even in a game where some other platform fighters have outstripped its movement mechanics. Pretty much every move he has is fun and satisfying to use, and it looks and sounds really cool. He's got sword-style moves, he's got brawler-style moves, he's got zoning, he's got counter-zoning, he's got flashy early kill setups, and he's got a huge arsenal of more reliable kill moves, and somehow all of this just coalesces into a moveset that feels way more cohesive than it has any right to. Pokemon Trainer, in the meantime, finally delivers on a concept the Smash series has been attempting to make work for literal decades at this point. The one character left in the roster who could originally transform and can still transform, and it's the more intricate one because it's 3 characters and every single one of the Pokemon works. Yes, they're all individually fairly linear, but they all feel very expressive, and their game plan, while being well-defined, still has room for creativity in it. Now, I'm cutting these segments short because I did a video on MockRock a little while back talking about what I think are the best designed ultimate characters, and these two, spoiler alert, were in the top 2 slots. So go check that video out if you want them in more detail. It's a little bit out of date. I'm not going to vouch for the entire list anymore, but I would still certainly say that Wolf and Pokemon Trainer would be the top 2. Would they necessarily be in that order anymore? It's honestly really hard to say. I don't know. I need to think about it more. Maybe revisiting that topic could be a future video. For the moment though, next on the list here, Ultra Fish Bunjin 3000. Slap said he took a big fish, and they gave him a shine. What else do you want from me here? Okay, in all honesty, this character is just super fun. The fundamental concept of a giant fish heavyweight, you've got me hooked in, but then you look at the way the moveset flows together, it's not especially intricate, but it all makes a lot of sense, and every single move he has feels well thought out and fun. On paper, it's kind of insane to give a character this big and this powerful so many different tools, and yes, Ultra Fish Bunjin 3000's power has fluctuated a fair amount over time. He's been kind of overtuned in the past. He's also been pretty weak in the past, but that's modern platform fighters, they balance them more often, and I think he's in a pretty decent place nowadays, and more importantly, even if individual numbers may have needed to be tweaked over time, the core concepts behind those moves still feel very well considered. Yes, flexing as a shine-esque move is funny, but it also plays an important role in his close-range pressure. Yes, his projectile is potentially devastating, but you can't just throw it out completely haphazardly. It takes some setup time, so you need to go in and use your close quarters tools to get your opponent off stage first, which is obviously something Fish Bunjin is well suited for. He actually has a surprisingly comprehensive combo game, more than you might initially expect coming in from some other platform fighters. But while the individual moves may flow together a bit differently than I'd expect, when you put everything together, it still absolutely creates the impression of this powerful brawler close quarters character, and it makes him an extremely expressive and fun character in the process. The second most fun I'd say you can have with a heavyweight in a platform fighter. And I say second most because coming up next, we've got Aether from Rushdown Revolt. Now, full disclosure up front, I have done paid work for Rushdown Revolt before as a commentator and as a consultant. They didn't have any kind of input into this video though. The reason I agreed to be involved with the game is because I really like it, and a huge part of the reason for that is Aether. Out of every character on this list, she's the only one I main. Similar to Ultrafish Bunjin 3000, if you're coming in from a different platform fighter, you may not initially be prepared for how extensive Aether's combo game is. However, even though her combo game is more complicated, there's actually much less of a defining feature here. Expressive and explosive combos are a huge part of the focus of Rushdown Revolt. It uses a spark canceling system inspired by Guilty Gear, so everyone can get a lot of hits, which once you start getting your head wrapped around it, actually feels incredibly good to do. So being a heavyweight with a combo game, not good enough. You need more of a direction than that, and Aether's is Grappler, and oh god, is this the grappler to end all grapplers in platform fighters. Rushdown Revolt uses 4 color bands rather than scaling percent, and inside each band you take the same knockback, which makes character direction actually much easier to tune. And when you start seeing that in every single color band Aether can get combos, except for the last one where she straight up starts killing you, you start to see where the team is taking her here, and that's just her base grab. Outside of that though, she also has 2 special moves completely dedicated to command grabs. 3 if you want to consider her dance special in the air and on the ground. So that'd be enough to sell me on her. I love grapplers, but there's one more thing they did which really pushes her grab game into just ludicrous territory, and I absolutely love it. You know DK's forward throw where you can carry an opponent around and then chuck them one of 4 different directions? Yeah, Aether has that. Except she has it for all her throws, including command grabs, and it's way better. So what you end up with, in my opinion, is just by far the most fun grappler to use in a platform fighter. I've never played one that even comes close to being as fun or expressive as Aether feels. From what I understand, she's not considered an especially high tier character right now, but if you tune into any kind of Rushdown Revolt tournament, you're gonna see her everywhere because she's just that fun to use, and she's also very simple despite everything I've said. I should say relatively simple. Again, she actually has a lot of intricacy behind her, but Rushdown Revolt can get very fast paced and very complicated, and she acts as somewhat of a respite to that, and I think she does a fantastic job. And she does have a lot of simpler elements that feel really good too. She's got the big stomp. She's got the big punch. She also similarly has a projectile, which I think feels very well suited to a heavyweight's moveset, and I would honestly say I prefer this one because its main job is to get you back into her arms. Plus, if you do it in the air, you get a lariat instead, and the lariat is a very time-honored tradition for wrestler-style characters, but I think this is my favorite implementation of it I've ever seen. It gives you some cool air mobility, and it spikes. She actually feels appropriately hard to kill, too, which is often a major issue I have with the Smash series in particular. Yes, she is absolute combo food, and in Rushdown Revolt in particular, that's really saying something, but she can basically always make it back if you don't finish her off. Her recovery is really good. It's still linear enough though that trying to edgeguard her doesn't feel insanely finicky. Yes, you can absolutely still go out there and challenge her, you just need to put some work into it. I think Aether's design is absolutely fantastic, and from a personal perspective, she's also one of my all-time favorite platform fighter characters to play. Now, again, I'm not a neutral source. Take what I say here with a grain of salt, but I'm saying it anyways. Okay, 2 straightforward heavyweights back to back. Let's do something very different for the next one here. Tom and Jerry from Multiversus. Now, Multiversus balance is still very much a fluctuating thing, and I know that Tom and Jerry in particular have often been a nightmare for the balancing team. I'm not going to get into it too much, and frankly, I barely even care, because from a pure conceptual standpoint, this is the most ingenious design I've ever seen. Tom and Jerry are a cartoon cat and mouse. As you may expect, in the cartoons, they spend all their time trying to beat each other up. Coming into a fighting game as a duo character, you may be expecting them to put their differences aside here, but no, they act perfectly in character, and they just keep doing the exact same thing. The character's design is completely based around collateral damage. They're just trying to hit each other, and if you should happen to get in their way, well, that's on you. Every animation, every interaction, they all reflect this. They stay so true to form, and it creates a very surprisingly functional character out of it. Duos are hard, and when I heard they were going to be a duo, I was kind of unsure about how exactly that would work. As it turns out, Tom is the main focus, as you may expect for the bigger character, but when you add Jerry into the mix, the moveset gets way more complicated and way more intricate and way more powerful, depending on the interactions between Tom and Jerry. There are so many of these, and a lot of them change pretty significantly based on the state that Tom and Jerry are in. If Jerry is with Tom, then he gets strapped onto a rocket, but if he's somewhere else on the stage, then the rocket instead gets launched at Jerry. You can use the slingshot to position Jerry on stage, and if you've already used it, you're instead going to sling more stuff directly at him, which he, by the way, will also send back because Jerry doesn't go down without a fight. Oh, and then Tom can send them back too. Tom and Jerry are in the mage class in Multiversus, which usually alludes to some kind of high complexity zoning character, but even by the standards of that game, they really go over the top. I'd be impressed by their moveset just from a pure mechanical perspective, but when you factor in just how incredibly well it pairs with the feel of the cartoons, they're in their own league here. There is a bit of a team sport aspect, as with all Multiversus characters. Jerry can be used to power up a teammate, but they're not really primarily focused on a doubles environment outside of the fact that having a lot of projectiles flying around everywhere is good in that format. And yeah, they are difficult to balance a zoner who also has some very good close quarters tools and a very high skill ceiling, that sounds like a headache. Best of luck to whatever the team eventually settles on, but they're still my favorite implementation of a duo mechanic I've ever seen in a platform fighter. Up next for the penultimate choice here, Melee Falco. As many of you already know, the direction that Melee took was a complete accident, not at all in line with the developer's original intentions, so the fact that so many characters from the roster ended up as influential and important as they did, and are still referenced so heavily so many years later, is honestly just insane, but Falco I think is the one where that all comes together the best. Fox is a very cool character in Melee, don't get me wrong, but he also doesn't have anywhere near the clear weaknesses that Falco has to help balance his strengths out. Falco can use his lasers to dominate neutral, but this is somewhat of a necessary addition because otherwise he's a bit on the slow side. And Melee is a game where the lasers have universal counterplay if you're skilled enough because of how power shielding works. Falco's combo game is fantastic and still one of the most expressive and entertaining we've ever seen in a platform fighter, so he's incredibly good at knocking opponents off the stage, and after he does, he's fantastic at keeping them there courtesy of his down air, a move which remains a fan favorite in the series despite, or maybe even because of how over the top it is, although it's not so over the top that it feels like it doesn't belong in Melee's environment whatsoever. This offensive prowess is balanced out by being a glass cannon though. If Falco is knocked off stage himself, he does have some mix-ups which have some nice interactions with your opponent, but he does overall struggle to make it back. Every aspect of how Falco plays, his offense, his defense, his neutral, it all feels extremely expressive, that word I keep coming back to because it means absolutely everything in a platform fighter. And while Melee balance is always a bit difficult to evaluate compared to most other platform fighters, you know, much older game and you just kind of accept that a lot of characters aren't viable, to me, Falco still feels like his balance is in a pretty good spot. To this day, he has multiple of the series' most iconic moves which have often been replicated, but in my eyes have never fully been measured up to, and not only do I think he's the overall best designed Melee character, but I also think he's the overall best designed clone character in the Smash series, so him appearing on this list was inevitable for me. Okay, before we get to our final picks, some honorable mentions, and this is the segment where I needed to start reeling myself in. I mentioned Melee Falco, but I also want to give a shout out to Melee Falcon, one of the most explosive just do it characters to ever exist, and I don't think it's ever felt so good or looked so entertaining. Another great duo is Afi and Galu from Rushdown Revolt. These guys are based around controlling one of a pair of statues at once, and there are tons of cool ping pong combos and other interesting interactions with the version that isn't currently in use. I'm also going to mention Kratos from PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. Now, that game I think is fundamentally flawed to its core, and if they ever try and reboot it, it should not work anything like it currently does, but you know what? If every character played more like Kratos, it would probably be at least a decent amount more fun. The artist from Slayers for Hire goes on here too. Very interesting and creative character, based around spawning lots of different assets into the world and always has a slipstream behind her that she can use in her movement. And then Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, a game which some people may have expected to show up in the main list. It's a project that was obviously made with a ton of heart behind it, but not a lot of money, and that does bleed into the character movesets, unfortunately. A lot of ground moves are recycled as aerials for no particularly good reason, for example, and while there are many charming references to the character's home series from a cosmetic perspective, a lot of the time it kind of ends there. Many moves just end up functioning very similarly to each other regardless of what they look like, and you end up with a lot of designs that, look, I like simple characters, but there's too much simplicity on display here. Now, one of the characters that I think has more spark in the base roster is Invader Zim. There's a cool mechanic there where you're controlling Zim himself and a puppet character at the same time, and there's multiple ways to interact with the puppet, and Zim's moveset himself, it feels better thought out and more fleshed out than a lot of the base roster. And look, I'm very aware I can't cover every platform fighter in here. Brawlhalla has a major omission in a video like this, although to be fair, in this particular instance, I do think the characters in that game tend to function way closer to each other than most platform fighters. Digimon made a platform fighter. You've got the Kirby Fighters games, you've got Brawl Out, Roof Rage, Indie Pogo. So nope, this video is obviously not comprehensive by any means, but it's what we're going with today. And speaking of which, Number 1. Marth was the first pure fundamentals sword fighter to show up in any platform fighter like this, and it's just incredible how much of the design they nailed the very first time around. The power and the sense of flow and the intricate use of space, he's been so influential that to this day, every platform fighter seems to need to have its own Marth, and none of them ever really compete with the original in my eyes. Except for one. Clarin from Rivals of Aether. Tipper sweet spots on long-ranged attacks which do additional damage and knockback are a ubiquitous part of weapon fighters and platform fighters at this point, but her Tipper actually freezes you in place, witch time on a stick essentially. And what that leads to is one of the most incredibly expressive combo games you're ever going to see on a platform fighter character. Skilled Clarins make great use of both the freezing sweet spots and the combo enabling sour spots to lead their opponent across the stage. This is powerful, yes, but Rivals of Aether in general has a very high power ceiling and DI is also very strong, strong here, so it's not nearly as overpowered as you may expect. In the past it was. Rivals of Aether has a proud tradition of releasing characters in busted states on launch, and Clarion was certainly no exception, but I think her current state is just absolutely fantastic to watch and play. Now, Clarion was blatantly designed to be one of the simplest members of the Rivals of Aether roster, which means she was clearly inspired by Marth, but she uses a lot more multi-hits, for example, which choosing the correct multi-hit at the correct spacing can also get you different rewards. This simplicity also refers to her elemental use. She's the fire element, in this case she's plasma, but whereas basically every Rivals of Aether character has some very fundamental way that their element controls the stage, she simply says, no, I'm getting rid of all that, and you're playing on my level. Her counter sets up a plasma field which eats through projectiles, which are a huge part of essentially every other character's game plan in Rivals. I think the idea of having a bare bones fundamentals character, at least by Rivals of Aether standards, go, no, put the gimmicks away, you're fighting on my turf now, is just fantastic, especially when there's a skill testing element behind it is triggered off a counter. And then she also has a command grab on her moveset, which may seem a little bit weird at first glance. Rivals of Aether characters do not natively have grabs. When you combine it with the freezing nature of her tipper mechanic though, it actually does make a lot of sense. It really ties together Clarion's combo game and makes it much more expressive than it already was. All of her moves individually are very understandable, I really like that, but when you start putting everything together and going on these tears across the stage that are based around your own micro spacing and anticipating opponents' DI, I'll say it again, you can make a solid case for pretty much any Rivals of Aether character showing up on here. Their designs in general are fantastic across the board, but Forceburn and Clarion are the two that stand out most to me, and I love the dichotomy of one character just showing off the full lunacy of coating the entire stage in smoke, and the other one who just says, nah, get that all out of here. This may be the single most difficult list I've ever had to make, and if you check in with me in a year, it likely wouldn't look anything like this, but at least for now, in my opinion, these are the top 10 best designs in a platform fighter. And that'll be the video for today. Okay, thanks for watching everyone, and let me know what you thought of the list. Likes and comments are a huge factor YouTube uses to gauge whether a video should be passed around to more people, so if you think this one deserves it, much appreciated. There's a video about nerfing every single Smash Ultimate character above, a video from my main channel MockRock below, and patrons, YouTube members, and Twitch subs get perks like early videos, Discord access, and voting on future content. Later, people.